Welcome and glad that you could be here. So while others are joining, think about one word, type one word in the chat that describes how you feel in that moment when somebody in your team or somebody you're working with pushes back at you. What are some of the words? You can do more than one word, but what happens to you? What's that sort of feeling that you get? Attacked, defensive, sinking gut feeling, apprehension. Some of those other words might be caught off guard, stuck. So just think about those words that affect you and keep them in mind, because by the end of today, hopefully you will be able to have a different response when somebody does push against you or want to have some kind of an argument. So I'm John. I think I know most of you that are on today. And I've been training managers and leaders for over 20 years through the Thriving Under Fire program. And the situations that we're going to tackle today, the pushback, the defensiveness, the blame, it's one of those things that trip up more good managers than almost anything else. Not because people are bad at their jobs, but because nobody has ever taught you what to actually say in those moments and how to handle those moments. Today, I want to change that for you. We'll look at these 5 mistakes that people often make and the 5 fixes. And we want to get some real language that you can use straight away. And so we'll get into that. So welcome to you all. What do you feel when an employee or a team member or somebody that you're working with pushes back against you? So let me tell you about one manager that I've been working with in the conflict-free leadership program. And he had a team member who'd become difficult, defensive, short-tempered, resistant to feedback. And every time this manager thought about addressing it, his stomach tightened. He'd rehearsed what he could say. He imagined how it would land. And then the more he worried, the more things got worse for him. So he kept putting it off. And then he joined the program and he got some of their skills and practiced them. He was able to practice them on the program. We kind of stepped through it. And then he booked a meeting with this person, walked in, had the conversation. The conversation took 10 minutes, and the team member wasn't defensive at all. He, in fact, was relieved that this conversation was happening because he had been struggling with something at home and he didn't know how to bring it up. And he thought the manager hadn't noticed or thought that he didn't care. And after that, the manager said, I got all my energy back, not just the energy of thinking about the conversation, but that Sunday night dread, the guilt, the careful positioning that he used to do to avoid eye contact in meetings. All of that energy came back to him. Now, if that's ever happened to you in your life, type in the chat, yes or no. Have you ever been in a situation, maybe not as dramatic as that, or maybe even more dramatic for you? Yep, yes, 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 yes. Not that you can remember, but people I support certainly have, and that's cool. And it's great that actually for all of you, if some of these things don't apply to you, you will know somebody else who's struggling with this kind of topic, and either you can give them a little bit of coaching, or there's a lot of resources that I put out that can help, or they might even be suitable to join the conflict-free leadership program. So the fact is that if this is you, you have experienced some of these things, then you're not alone, and not even close, because this is what I want you to know before we go any further, that managers in this situation are not weak. They are not poor leaders. They're simply making mistakes that they don't know that they're making. And that's what today's about. And the big program, I'll talk about it a bit more at the end, but if you are interested in booking a call to talk about it, then let me even just pop that. You can do that if you want to talk through this in a more detail, or how it might apply to you. But so we want to look at these 5 mistakes. And the number one is so often is misreading what pushback actually is. So when somebody pushes back against you, most leaders experience this as a challenge to their authority. It's an attack. Maybe it's a power struggle. So they respond to it like it is one. They defend, justify, double down, And that's where the situation escalates. So let's just think about this. Here's what's actually happening, and this is the dirty little secret about pushback. It's something's occurred, a decision, a piece of feedback, an instruction. So it, it fits with the ape model that I teach, and I'll talk about it next as well. There's an action, and something's happened, and then there's a perception, and whether it's accurate or not, something is triggered in them, and then there's an emotion which drives their behavior. But their behavior, which you might experience as some kind of an attack or some kind of power play or something that you've got to resist, here's the thinking that is radically different. The difficult person is not against you, they are for themselves. And just think about that for a moment, what that really means. It feels like they're against you, of course, because your whole system activates your brain. The amygdala fires up and says, hang on, this person's attacking you. But they're not against you, they are for themselves. They've got something that they want, that they feel, whether it's something happening in the workplace or in their environment, and they want to look after themselves. But when you interpret it as being against you, then you're going to fight back, as opposed to if you see it as quite the opposite. It's almost got nothing to do with you. It's got everything to do with them. And so thinking about that, it's almost like this is a fundamental way of thinking about everybody that you come in contact with who wants to do something and or is pushing back against you. So they're protecting something that matters to them, their reputation, their sense of fairness, their self-image, and they really are defending themselves. And once you see the pushback this way, then everything changes. And you stop reacting to an attack that isn't happening, and you start responding to the person who's struggling. Now that shift is about how you read the situation is the foundation of everything that we're going to do. Is that cool? All right. So mistake number two that's so easy to make is really getting to the facts too soon. And this is the very common mistake, especially if you know a lot of the data, if you know a lot of the information, or even if you're in a hurry. And so it's completely understandable that you would want to jump to that, like let's just get this sorted out. There's pressure about this, and so when you do jump to the facts too quickly and start trying to sort it out, that's when the other person gets even more defensive rather than less defensive, because when you think that emotion is driving what they are doing, that's what you really need to acknowledge first. And if you do this, what you're doing by acknowledging what the other person's feeling, what you're seeing, and expressing something of what you're seeing, that itself is real. That's what empathy is. It's seeing what the other person's feeling and letting them know that you see it in a way that's non-judgmental, that's just in a way that's quite accepting. And so you may be aware of this model that I teach a lot. That action is a perception and emotion. And when you see, instead of responding to the action or their perception, trying to correct what they might have said if it's inaccurate, you first of all need to respond to the emotion, no matter what they've said. And that might sound like you seem really frustrated about this, or I can see this has caught you off guard, or this clearly matters to you. Something, you've thought a lot about this. Some of those kind of words that you might use that are useful. You want to be short, direct. You don't need to give a big explanation, but when you say this, they will get it that at least you understand this much about them, and this is the key thing that's driving them is how they feel. And you're not necessarily saying you agree with what they're saying, but you're not conceding your position. You're not backing down. You're simply saying, I see that you're feeling something strongly, and I'm not going to pretend that I didn't notice. And noticing what somebody feels is one of the harder, and then acknowledging it is a real challenge, because there's fear of whether they will escalate more, whether they'll get even worse, and then what will you do? The really interesting thing about it is invariably when people get it, when they feel that you understand them, or you've named their feeling, that's when their feelings decrease because they kind of feel they're accepted in that moment. I can tell you about that, but what I really much more need to do is, or encourage you to do, is try this out and start noticing it when you say these things to people, when you acknowledge their emotion, and then you will see how people are change, how it affects people when you acknowledge them. Let's have a look at the mistake number three that people make, and that is they talk too much. So when some when you get defensive, you can end up talking more. You want to explain more, justify yourself, and you can pile on more context. And when you do that, of course, the other person actually digs even deeper. And so here's a phrase that can stop mid-conversation if you use these words rather than talking too much. Just here's three words: help me understand. It's an invitation to them to talk. Just even though you may or may not understand and think you know what they're talking about, but it's a very powerful invitation to them. So just help me understand what it is that really is going on for you. And I mean, again, the fear is that this is going to take longer, but the contradiction in all of this is that if you spend a little bit of time now on this, it will save an awful lot of problems further down the line. And so help me understand what's been happening from your side, or help me understand what's not sitting right for you. Help me understand what you were expecting. So these phrases, they do three things. They signal that you're not in attack mode. It gives the other person space to talk, and it positions you as someone secure enough in your authority to be curious rather than defensive. Because when you're defensive, people pick it up. I mean, you know this from your own experience of being with one of your managers at whatever level where people get defensive. And, you can just feel that. Whereas here, you can just be open to hearing what they say. Again, you don't have to agree with them, but the idea is to understand them and to give them a chance to speak, and for them to let them see you are not defensive. So, and after you ask that question, stop talking. Just ask the question, then listen completely. Don't need to prepare a rebuttal while they speak. Just listen. And because when they are pushing back, that they are emotional, there's something driving them. And by taking your time and not necessarily even adding more words to the whole conversation yourself, it could even be, let me think about that for a bit. Let's just take our time to think about it. You slow it right down, and that helps the other person calm down as well. One of the side benefits of this is that you may actually learn something new that you didn't know, and that could change the situation as well. So you just really don't know what's going to come up when you ask that question. Help me to understand. So mistake number four would be arguing with blame. Now, this is when you've got people who are blaming other people, and it's sort of such a difficult one to deal with because it's infuriating. The employee, the employee or the team member or whoever it is you're working with blames someone else, the team, the process, the previous manager, the system, anyone but themselves. And the temptation, it's a really strong temptation, is to correct the record, to point out exactly where they were responsible, to prove that their blame is misplaced. But here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to say, actually, that's not accurate. Never say, I did tell you in the meeting on Tuesday, or never say, that's not fair on your colleagues. You want to, when people are emotional, they will say silly things or inaccurate things, but what they're doing is talking a lot from their own experience. So all of those comments that you might say shuts down the conversation, turns it into a debate about the past, and you'll not win that debate. Even if you're completely right, you won't win it because the other person isn't listening to your arguments. They are defending their story. So here's a much better response that you might want to consider. Acknowledge the part of their experience that is real without accepting all the blame, and then redirect to what happens next. So you might say, yeah, okay, that did happen. and you redirect it to what's happened next. Now, there's a little piece about blame that's worth knowing that when in systems thinking, there's never one single cause to one single effect. Something's happened, there are always lots of causes to it. And so actually blame has no place really in this kind of situation. You want to be able to just think, well, there are lots of other things. And yes, your perception of what's happened and it looks like this other person's done it or somebody's to blame. But really to run a good team and to run even just to be a good team member for that matter, is to get rid of the word blame altogether and saying, you can say, what are the causes of this? What can we do to change it? And that's the sort of the second part of this. When you don't want to argue with blame, you acknowledge their experience and then say, and what can we do to work this out or to sort this out? And here's what I need from you going forward. So notice what that does. You haven't agreed that it was someone's fault. You haven't argued about the past. You've acknowledged that something went wrong, which is usually at least partly true, and you've moved the conversation forward. It's not a weakness. That this is really what leadership is. You're not relitigating the past. You're solving the problem, and this is exactly what authority looks like in practice. So let's just take a break before, or a little thing before we go into step 5. Let's kind of practice this a little bit. Let's have a look at 3 scenarios, and I invite you in the chat just to write something really quick. Don't overthink it. Give your first instinct response. So here's the scenario where they say, that's not fair. You always single me out. So what's going to be your response in that moment? What would be something? Oh, that's cool. No, I don't. Or that's not true. No, I don't. What is not sitting right for you? What's not sitting right for you? Yeah, cool. I'm sorry you feel that way. It's not my intention. Yep. It's not my intention. I'm sorry you feel that way. And what's not sitting right for you? That would invite that kind of openness of letting them say something. But certainly that instinct is goes, it's not right. You've got it wrong. I'm not picking on you. Although if you keep pushing back at me, I might pick on you. Let's think. So, yeah, by saying no, it's not, or that's not true, you're kind of having an argument about what, that does create the argument. Yes, it is true. I've got evidence for it, and it's not a conversation. It becomes a standoff. But it's so instinctive, though, isn't it, when you've been falsely accused? So you might also think it sounds like you're feeling that things haven't been even. Help me understand what's been happening from your side. So you haven't agreed with them that you're picking on them, and you haven't backed down, but you've opened the door instead of closing one. So let's have a look at scenario 2. It's not my fault. No one told me. What kind of response, instinctive response, might might you or another manager come, or let's just see. And I'm sorry if you're, oh no, it's not my intention. Help me understand why it looks that way to you. You've been told 100 times, yes. And they probably have. This is difficult. We will have to review the structures. Cool. There was an email. Okay, but let's see how we can move forward. Cool. The temptation really is to say, actually, I did tell you in the meeting, or, there was an email, which may be completely true, but now that they are defensive about being caught out on top of everything else, so that you're just going to increase that defensiveness. So you might think of things like, which is, okay, sounds like there's been a gap in how the information's getting to you. It is that difference between this is what I said and this is what you heard. Two very important distinctions in communication. So it's being able somehow to acknowledge that. Let me just think about that now. So you've acknowledged your experience and you've moved to a solution. Your authority stays intact with that. And and then the third scenario would be your team member goes completely silent, arms folded, they shut down. What's your response going to be? What do you say? Cool. I can see you're not happy. Can you tell me what's going on? Nice. My instinctive response is to mirror them and go silent as well. Yep. But we don't have to discuss this now, but let me know when you're ready to talk. Nice. And ask if they want to go for coffee. Probably tend to be direct the conversation elsewhere. All of those responses are, have got some good merit in them. It's being able to acknowledging that I can see that this isn't easy for you to talk about right now. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. So you're not chasing them and you're not punishing them for silence. You're staying steady. And that steadiness is its own kind of authority. So it's like not being put off by it yourself, even thinking right back to they're not against you, they're for themselves. And they just might not have the words for it. They're not used to this kind of situation. Their feelings might be very strong as it is. I remember I had a very good trainer once. She was a psychiatrist and she taught me a lot about the psychodrama particularly. But one of the phrases she would used to know, she would used to use is, do you know what it is yourself that's bothering you? You don't have to tell me, but do you know? And that was an incredibly permission giving kind of statement to make, where you're not prying, you're not chasing them, you're just allowing them to do some processing for themselves. And, if they say, no, I don't know what's going on for myself, I'm just overwhelmed at the moment, and, whatever it might be, that's you're dealing with something quite different, and you can kind of say, okay, what do you need for that? Or or they might say, yes, I do know, it's actually got nothing to do with you. Or, yes, I do know, but I can't tell you right at the moment. And then you've got all those. Do you want to would it help if we had a cup of coffee? Do you want to talk about this tomorrow, another time? Any of those responses. It seems like you've got a pretty good handle on that. So let's just try some. Those were a couple of three scenarios that I've put up. Now, let's just take a little bit of time. We've got allowed time to what's a real situation that you would be willing to bring to the group, share with others, something you might be dealing with now or recently dealt with, or something that's still in your mind that bugged you even some years ago. You don't need to use names, just the situation. So, is there something that you?
One thing that bugs me is people don't have their planning up to date.
Mhm.
And when asked, they say, yep, 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 but they never do it. So I'm chasing them and getting more and more frustrated myself.
Yeah, that's a pretty common situation, isn't it? Where you say yes and don't do and won't do it. Uh, Happens at home as much as at work. One of the things from the people that wrote a series of books, Crucial Conversations, and their second book they did was called Crucial Accountability. What they said about this kind of situation is that if you keep chasing them, what that ends up as you're nagging. And that doesn't work. Then it's not good for you, it's not good for them. So the conversation that they want to have, they have kind of three levels of conversation. So first of all, you've asked them, have you got your planning? Can I see it, or whatever exactly you ask for in terms of doing that. When they don't do it, you say, look, I asked you for this last week and you haven't done it. I'm wondering what's happening. What is there something got in the way with not being able to do it? Is there something I can help with this, whatever it is, and get them to talk about it. Now, so that's the second level. And the third level is when they still don't do it after that. It becomes a conversation about trusting your word. So when you said you would do it by Friday, and we already had that other conversation, I want to be able to trust your word when you say something. And so that becomes, so there's kind of three different conversations that you're having, but you're not just saying, come on, where is it, where is it, where is it? But you have a different conversation each time. Does that make sense, Jackie?
Yep. Yeah.
Could I chip in and say the other thing that they say is unbundle with CPR, and don't worry, you don't have to do CPR unless the meeting goes really bad. But CPR means content, pattern, or relationship. And with so many things that you have to deal with as a leader, it's a pattern, isn't it? It's like I've on 3 different one-to-ones, I've talked to you about your plan or your XYZ. And each time you've assured me that you're on top of it, and each time you aren't. And I'm concerned that you aren't meeting my expectations, or I'm concerned that the expectations we agreed on are continually not met. So the idea being content's a funny one, it's Americanized, but it's kind of a thing that happened. Quite good for misconduct, hope you don't have to deal with it, but, or you weren't prepared for a meeting, or you said something awful in a meeting or something. Pattern is pattern. And then relationship, if it's about the relationship. I've noticed that in a team meeting situation, whenever I speak, you roll your eyes and you say something to countermand what I'm saying. Because it is technically content because it's something that they do, but there's a relationship thing. And I've got a resource on this if anybody wants it, but it's just this idea that you have to address what the actual problem is. And I really like that unbundle with CPR thing. It makes me giggle thinking if you don't do this, you might end up doing CPR, but just try and think what it is. And the planning thing, this is why I've stopped leading people, by the way, is I'm sick of them lying to me, because you can have as many accountability conversations as you like, but it doesn't change. Don't worry, I just teach managers now. It's much better. But this is the idea, is what's the actual issue?
Yeah, thanks, Bridie. That the CPR, I was actually trying to remember that acronym. It's because you've done a lot of that training, haven't you, at Wellington City Council? Yeah, so just jot that down.
Content, pattern, relationship.
It's a good one. And then, Margaret, your situation, a person that brings up things that they did not think were fair from years ago.
So you kind of, not so much work related, but you kind of end up going into defensive mode to actually balance the ledgers and sort of say, well, yes, we did, yes, it was fair, but the conversation is never moved on from, so you're always going back to it.
Yeah.
So how do you break that pattern in a positive way, or how do you phrase, for the person, how do you make them feel that you are making a difference, or that you are hearing or understanding what it's feeling like for them? It's haven't been successful to date.
So just one little phrase that you said right at the beginning where you've told them, yes, it was fair. And fair it's a little bit like saying, what I said and what they heard, that distinction. So for them, it wasn't fair. It didn't feel fair, even if everything that you did was as fair as you could possibly be. So again, it's in that area of being able to say, so for you, it doesn't feel fair, and it's still sticking with you, isn't it? Something along those lines. Can you let me know, help me understand this a little bit more? Now, when you think about this as a process for people, some people carry hurts. I mean, they are deeply hurt for whatever reason, even from very small incidents. Can it might be added to a lot of other things in their life that you had nothing to do with necessarily. But whatever it is, they are feeling as if life has been unfair to them. So and I mean, in the end, there is a simple statement: life is unfair, and but that kind of sermon isn't going to help them. But being able to just to sort of acknowledge that for you, this really did seem very unfair to you, and it still hurts you now, to me, would be quite a strong statement, where you're not giving away the fact that you already did. Whatever you did was everything that you could possibly do. But you're not defending that at the moment. What you're really doing is being able to say to them, help me understand what would help you move on from then, would be also the next step. I think once, especially if they tell you quite a lot, well, this happened and that happened, and then I did this like this, and I'm feeling, aha. And often you don't even need to say much more. In fact, probably these situations, the less you say, the better. But being able to go, right, I didn't understand that at the time. I missed that, and I'm sorry I missed it. It could be things like that. I didn't fully appreciate that that's how you did feel. I can see that's hurt you. That also brings in that power apology, where you make an apology. Yes, I did that. I didn't realize that it hurt you, but I can see that it has. That's number 2. Number 3, I'm sorry that I did that. Number 4, if appropriate, is there anything I can do now that would make a difference, help you move on and help us get together, but work better together? And then I'll certainly try not to do that again.
Yep.
That's your best chance, always with the proviso that there are some people who are not going to be ever satisfied. But for most people, if you know you've done that much, then you've done an awful lot.
Yep. Thank you.
But if somebody says that it felt unfair to me, then it was it did feel unfair. It wasn't necessarily unfair, but it feels unfair, and that's the part that you're dealing with, the feeling rather than the facts, if you can make that distinction. Cool. It's a really good example. Thank you. Let's move on. So let's have a look at just the mistake that number 5 that a lot of people make, and that is not ending with clarity, ending without clarity. It's how a lot of most difficult conversations end. One person backs down, or both people trail off, or the manager says something vague like, let's just see how we go, shall we? And nothing really changes. So the employee walks away a bit unclear about that. The manager is hoping that it's resolved, but it isn't. And the same issues can surface again 2 weeks later, or 2 months, or 2 years later even. Thinking about getting a specific step that you can say, here's the next thing that I would like you to do. You might say, now, in order to get there, let's just go through, there's 3 little ways. You want to name what you've heard. So what I'm hearing is that you felt blindsided by this decision, or even in the example that you gave. So what I'm hearing is that 5 years ago, when that happened, you really felt that it was unfair. And that just, often one sentence is enough just to show that you've listened to what they've said. And then state what you need going forward. One specific, observable, forward-looking request. It's not a lecture. It's not a list of a whole bunch of things to do, but one thing. So going forward from this, when you disagree with the decision, I need you to bring it to me more directly rather than raising it with the team first. Something like that. It's concrete, doable. If you do feel something's unfair that I do, it would be really good to make sure, bring it to me so that I can hear what that is. I won't always be able to act on it, but at least we can have this conversation. And then step 3 with that is closing with the relationship. So I value working with you. That's why this conversation matters to me. This is not the flattery. We're not talking about the, what people often call the shit sandwich. If you're giving feedback or you're saying something unpleasant to the other or that they don't necessarily want to hear, but you want to make that genuine. I mean, this conversation does matter to me because I want to work well with you. And I want you to enjoy your work here, because when you do, everything will be better for you, better for the team, better for whatever it is. In that you're not just correcting behavior, but you're reinforcing the relationship and keeping that still intact. Those 3 steps: name what you heard, state what you need, and close with the relationship. So thinking about your own pattern, what's your pattern, your default pattern, as it were, when you get some pushback from other people, and what do you reach for first? Do you freeze and sort of disappear down a hole? Do you fight, get firmer, defend your position, which sometimes can most times would escalate? Or do you appease and smooth it over and give them what they want, and in the process carry the frustration with that? Freeze and appease, then appease. Freeze first, usually, but often fight. The fight yourself. Yes. Beat yourself up. Oh dear. It's it's just so, some of these things are so challenging, aren't they? These moments, particularly when you're feeling under pressure, you've got a whole lot of other things happening, and here's this person coming in and saying something that is going to mess up your day. So, those kind of reactions is noticing them and being able to, sometimes even if you start changing them or you want to do something different. Quite a lot of talk that we do in the conflict-free leadership programs, at least become aware of where this started in your life. These are not therapy sessions, but they're kind of when you've got some appreciation of, in this moment, when somebody says this to me, I feel like a little kid, or I feel like I've been, being told off by a school teacher or by my mother or my father or something, because that happens a lot in our life. A lot of the time we're not conscious of it. We don't recognize it consciously, but we do act that way unconsciously. And in fact, why doing this matters, of course, is that it does affect your effectiveness, your profitability, and it also runs your batteries down, your energy, and your enjoyment in your careers. So getting the hang of this. But all of those things, fighting, freezing, appeasing, they're all learned responses. They were your survival mechanism when you were younger, and you had to make your way in the world or in your family and whatever. So they made sense at some point in your life, but as a leader, they can keep you stuck. And so what we've been doing today and looking at those things is about reading the situation more correctly. They're not against you, they're for themselves. Acknowledge feelings before facts, asking, help me understand, and redirecting the blame so that it's not blame, but it's like, okay, acknowledging that they're upset. What can you do? What needs to change in the system? And then end with clarity. Oh, there we go. That was that bit there. Just even for yourself, as you come to the end of this, what's one conversation that you're putting off for yourself? Might be a big one or a smaller one. And I'll just have a look. It depends on the scenario and the person, right? So that, how could you apply what we've covered today? How would that help you with one of those conversations that you're thinking of? Yeah. At least keep this for yourself. You don't have to put it in the thing, but just really being aware of that there are conversations, and some of them, they do, not having them can take up a lot more energy than having them.
I guess it's part of the human condition that there might be one issue, but so many different angles of looking at it. and that everybody really is, it's about them, isn't it?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yep.
It's just a
And
bit hard, John.
it's exactly, you know, if it was easy, we wouldn't have to do these kind of sessions, and I'd have to find another career, which is a bit late now. But it is a challenge, and you know, even what you've written there, Bridie, you know, you get frustrated, and then the other person notices that, and it winds up. So it's a real work to do this consciously, to work with people, and to notice, and to be able to come up with half decent responses from yourself. But part of it is first becoming aware of what some of these challenges can be, and what some of the mistakes that it's partly why I named as 5 mistakes that many managers don't realize that they're making.
I guess it can be quite hard where you're in that situation, and if one of your sort of your triggers or your buttons is inaccuracy, is to not go down that path where you're trying to put the facts straight. For me, that's a real hard one to stop and just keep focusing on the person's perspective and not trying to put things right. So for me, that would be a key one that I've got to work on, is to stop
Yes.
myself. Yeah.
One
And
thing I think a lot about is parentification. So people I work with, and it happened a little bit to me when I was leading, is people somehow go into child parent mode, and the manager suddenly becomes this parent that has to solve things. And the frustration I feel is it's multi-layered. We haven't got all day, but one of them is I don't understand why I have to have this conversation, or why we are even having this conversation. You are a professional and life is hard and life sucks and bad things happen to good people. And if you don't know that by now, you highly paid, tertiary trained human being, and it's still wrong to punch people in the face. I don't know how to have this conversation calmly. And and it's happening more and more. And I'm reading stuff about Generation Z and their alleged reduced skill in addressing conflict, and wanting to raise up, they're being accused of being snowflakes, and we can talk about them as if they're out the back in the cupboard, but actually they're the biggest growing segment of our workforce, as are younger millennials who have Z traits. And it's sort of, when I'm coaching now, I'll say, is there a way that you can get them to own their own thing? You know how, I don't know if you remember this, but I used to have to say to myself, grown-ups go to work, grown-ups go to work, grown-ups go to work, right? Because, you can't go 1 hour a week for the 1 hour you feel like going. And it used to be, I'm trying to get at, how do I get the onus back onto them to solve this? How do I lift this back into adult to adult dynamic without coming across as if I don't care or I'm not listening? And there's a
Yes.
certain leader in New Zealand at the moment who's been in the news. You may have heard of him, and he's not listening to 70% of New Zealanders who's saying your leadership is not acceptable. And it just, there's so many layers to it, but why aren't you doing something about it?
Like that I reckon is the challenge. And when we even think about Gen Z or young people, whatever, it's like, who has brought them up? And then who brought those people up? So the changes that have happened, if you're kind of asking why don't they do this? And surely they would get it. The For baby boomers, they came up through a world that did teach these kind of things, or certain values. But when they became parents, the world had changed already. And so, the parenting, there wasn't the same time to do parenting. And then the next generation that's come have been under even more pressure. So what it ends up as is that in the workplace, you end up needing to coach people literally through some of those, almost the developmental stages of childhood that they didn't get, because not because their individual parents weren't good enough, but because the world was operating in a different way. And so I think that does put real extra pressure on managers to, if you can kind of take that bigger view, this is why many of these conversations become more difficult even.
And the
But
decision you have to make as a manager, as I had to, is this something I want to keep doing?
absolutely, yeah. And you don't have to, obviously, and you haven't. But it's kind of noticing what happens to you in that moment. And, so I mean, this actually comes up quite a lot in the conflict-free leadership program that I do, because people come and say they should be doing this, you should, and it's an opportunity to really challenge that thinking, so that, because if managers can change that way of thinking, managing people becomes a lot easier, and it becomes quite a different task altogether, and much more easy to do. So where I just kind of, manage, do that. If you've got some people that you might think, somebody that would benefit from even just having a good call with me, and I'm looking at this even as a diagnostic call these days, then by all means, please pass that on to them. So we just do that. We do that as a quick call, and they can kind of work out what's the best way forward for them. We've done the Q&A bit, but I also would like, if you've got some positive comments you'd like to make about this session, so that I can help promote it, because I will make this available to other people, that they can look at the recording. This recording will also be available to you, and I've got to download a little summary of some of these ideas that we'll send out to you either later today or tomorrow, so that you can download. Thank you for your time, and
Thank you, John.
This has been benefit. Oh, good, Jules. Anything you want to say before we go? It's been helpful. What's one key idea that you will take from this? That might be a way of thinking about that.
My key idea is to take it away from me and look at the person.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. Yep.
I'd love to hear some more from Bridie. She's very interesting. Thank you.
She's great, isn't she? Thank you, Bridie. This is what I love about doing a session where we've got input. People can speak up and share some ideas. That are you still at the council, Bridie, doing the?
No, I left in 2021. I'm down in Canterbury now.
Are you?
Just working for myself. Yep.
Yeah, nice.
So I work a lot in not-for-profits and community organisations and things, and just aware that some of the big programs that big corporates or public sector do around this stuff isn't available to them, or is too out of pocket for them, and yet managing psychosocial risk and conflict with managers and things is increasingly common everywhere.
Yes.
And I know I talk about myself a lot, but just so aware of, if it drove me nuts 5 years ago, it's driving other people nuts.
Yeah.
And what is, I'm a big picture thinker. I make connections and I look for patterns, and this parentification stuff and the snowflake generation and thing, I think is really real. And there was an article that in the Forbes top 100, I think, organizations or companies in America are spending an average of 70%. Oh, I've forgotten it. 7 weeks a year on managing interpersonal issues, and that's per manager.
Gosh.
So I don't have the research to hand because I'm not that person, but something like if you've got 52 weeks in a year, take off 4 for leave, 2 for sick leave, another 2 for state holidays. I don't know what that makes. 7, let's say 36 for argument's sake, and you're spending 7 managing people and their behaviour.
Gosh.
We need to do some work collectively. And I'm seeing it in, I'm also a political science grad, so I'm a news junkie, and I'm seeing this in what people think leaders of governments and communities are responsible for fixing now. Just yesterday I coached somebody who's being attacked by their neighbour verbally for not having cut back their tree, and it's like World War III is about to start. I'm like, oh my God, it's a tree.
Yes.
Yeah,
Bridie, something you said really resonated with me. Not a lot of people see the bigger picture, and I used to find that myself in management, even just in relation to a strategic plan, and people overcomplicate things to a degree. They say things can't be as simple as this as a strategic plan. You might have just 3 priorities for your business or for your organisation. Oh no, it can't be that simple. There's something you're hiding. So there's an inbuilt suspicion that people seem to have about management for a start that needs to be overcome. That we're actually in this together. Oh no, we're not. You're pushing us to do things that we don't necessarily agree with or understand, and there's got to be some other agenda. But
actually, people complicate things so that they don't have to deal with what's right in front of them, right?
Yeah.
You know how when you argue with your spouse or your sister or whatever, and you're fighting about something ridiculous, but you're actually fighting about the relationship or about needs or something, but we're not enlightened enough to say, I feel ignored by you or whatever. Instead, you have a fight about who didn't clean the microwave.
Right.
Although that is a valid concern. May I add.
Cool.
Thanks, John.
All right, that's good.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. And thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, team.
Good.
See you.
Yeah. See ya.
Okay, bye-bye.